Well, hello and welcome to another video by Financial Learning. On today's video, we're going to take a look at 15 different Bitcoin mining companies. We're going to be comparing each of their individual stock prices, taking a look at their short scores, and then we're also going to be comparing them as a sector whole on the weekly, the monthly, and also compare them against the price of Bitcoin. We're going to be taking a look at the max pain for each of these companies and also any weekly updates that we did get through different press releases of these companies. I will be sharing that to help maybe explain why some of these companies may have seen some price action going up or down. So without further ado, let's get right into it. All right, and starting with the left-hand side, you're going to be able to see all the different company ticker symbols. Now, the ones that are highlighted yellow mean that we have had a change in the weekly short percent for these specific companies. You can see in the top five, we had a significant amount of movement. TeraWulf did remain number one, but you can see CleanSpark dropped all the way down to number five on the short interest rankings, and Mara did jump up to number two. So quite a bit of movement there. BTDR and RIOT, all of them actually switched places this specific week. And then looking kind of in the middle section there, all moved in terms of their short percent rankings. So we'll take a look at each of these individual companies. We'll look at their short percentages. We'll also look at that max pain, and I will give you just a couple updates for some of these companies. But moving over, you can see the price as of the weekly close on June 20th and then also June 27th. This update is for June 27th, so we're going to be using the June 20th as a comparator to see how they did on the weekly. So when I talk about weekly close, I am talking about the actual market close, not including after hour price action. But moving past that, before we talk about the weekly percent gains, let's take a look at the max pain. And of course, the max pain is the price that the market makers would like to see the specific company get to in order for them to be able to make the most money on the options chain. So you can see any of the ones where the max pain is in red, that means that the company's stock price is actually above that max pain amount, which may mean that the market makers want to try to push that price down. And the ones that are green, of course, that would be the opposite. The market makers do want to see this price getting a little bit higher so that they are not going to have to pay out as much on the options chain. But moving past that, take a look at these weeklies. I did bold a couple of the significant changes. Let's start with the highest. You can see CORZ Scientific actually had a weekly change of 40.4%. Of course, a lot of that had to do with the fact that they are in discussions with CoreWeave for a potential buyout. This is not the first time this has happened, but it does look like quite a bit of shareholders are getting excited. I've seen a lot of people try to put valuations behind the company. So it's going to be pretty interesting to see if this continues or if we see any pullbacks, but it's been pretty strong for the last couple of days in the market. And moving past them, you're going to see IREN. They actually have the second highest weekly change at 33.7%. Again, an excellent weekly close for IREN. Now, as far as their stock goes, there has been quite a lot of excitement about reaching that 50 exahash. I haven't seen that come out yet, but the month will officially be over tomorrow on Monday when the market is open. So it's going to be the last day of the month, and that would be when the company should be putting out a press release if they are going to be able to hit their milestone goal. Of course, they could finish the day and then share with us on Tuesday what that looks like. And don't forget, this is a short week in the market with July 4th on a Friday. So keep that in mind. It's just going to be a 4 trading day week. Moving on past that, you're going to see that CleanSpark came in at number 3 on the weekly change at 18.6%. They did announce a 50 exahash milestone achievement. And of course, all of their hash rate is fully owned and operated. They do not host at any of their facilities. So all of those miners are owned. And it is all done here in the USA. But looking at some of the negative price action, we do see that Bitfarms had a negative 3.9%. So although the majority of the Bitcoin mining sector saw some excellent price appreciation, there were a few companies that actually had some price reduction. And we'll talk about that in the notes section a little bit when we talk about some of the press release items. But moving past that, let's now jump into the share short, short value, and short percent. So any of these cells that I have highlighted red mean that the short interest percent has been reduced, when comparing it to just one day ago. So we're looking at that estimated Friday short percent compared to that estimated Thursday short percent. And the ones that are in green mean that the short interest has increased for those specific companies. So you will see one company, BTDR, they actually remain flat when comparing Thursday to Friday, so they don't have a color there. But moving on past that, next is going to be free float. You're going to see some of these cells highlighted in yellow, and that's because the number of shares available in their free float has changed. And if you move over 2 columns, you're going to see that free float delta. I want to talk specifically about the one here for BTBT. They had an additional 74,540,000 shares being added to their free float. We'll have to see if this specific data set does hold true next week when we look at the Ortex data, but it is a pretty large, substantial amount of free float change. And there has been plenty of press releases for BTBT. We'll talk about those press releases in just a minute. So if you look at some of the weekly percentages, you're going to see that the ones that had a significant amount of free float increase saw a pretty substantial drop in that share price. Now, of course, Hive was an exception to that. And they actually had a couple of really good press releases that came out. And I think that they did get some price appreciation for that. So they were able to hedge some of that free float increase by some of the bullish news that was released. But you can see some negatives. So we do see that TeraWulf had a $140,000 change, actually reducing their free float. And then we also see HUT8 with a 100,000 share reduction. So not all of these that actually changed did go up. But if we are looking at the entire sector as a whole, you can see that 135,380,000 shares has been added to this sector free float. But before we move over and talk about the price appreciation of the sector, let's look at those weekly short percentages. We're going to look at the highest increase on weekly short percent, and that's actually going to be for Mara. They had a 3.63% increase on their short interest with respect to free float. That is pretty big, and that's why they are now number 2 on this specific 15 company ranking list. And if you look a little bit below, you're going to see that BTBT had a reduction in their weekly short percent by 3.96%. And I think some of that reduction is because of so many shares being added to their free float. Of course, that's going to reduce that short interest percent. But you can also see a couple other substantial drops on their short interest percent without actually impacting from free float. You can see here BitDR had a negative 1.41% reduction in their short interest on the week. Now, one that had a reduction on free float also had a reduction on their weekly short percent, and that's TeraWulf with a 2.72%. Another one I want to talk about is going to be CleanSpark. They did not have a change in their free float, but they did have a weekly short percent reduction of 1.81%. And you can see they dropped all the way down to number 5 on the list. But moving past all of that, before we talk about the sector as a whole, I want to talk about some of the press releases that have came out that may have impacted either the short percent for the week or this price appreciation on the week. The first of which is going to be Mara. They did announce a partnership with TAE Power Solutions. This is going to be the first of its kind. This is for a grid efficiency platform. So Mara is looking for other potential revenue streams besides just mining Bitcoin or utilizing it as a treasury system or generating yield or something of that nature. They've also looked at ways they can support the Bitcoin mining and AI infrastructure. So this is a great way they're able to provide a service with this other partner, this TAE solution. So interesting read, take a look at that, and I'll go ahead and add a link in the description of the video. The next I want to talk about, I already mentioned, that's going to be CleanSpark. They did reach that 50 exahash for the mid-year goal, just as they did say they would do. And they have announced that they do expect to be able to reach 60 exahash. However, they have not given us a specific target timeline for that. And I've mentioned it before that I do believe that's just because they want to keep their options open. So if a really good deal does come out, maybe it's an acquisition, maybe it's a substantial number of miners, they want to be able to make a purchase without having to delay their said goal that they have. So if they have a specific timeline, they don't want to be handcuffed to that timeline. So I don't necessarily blame them for that. you do see that they do provide us with a month-to-month update with press releases on their mining metrics. Those, of course, do include hash rate, efficiency, number of miners, and Bitcoin mined. So really, we're going to be able to see month over month how they continue to provide value to shareholders with their operational update. Moving past them, the next one I want to talk about is going to be CIFR. They announced that they did energize their Black Pearl, and they have a total of 2.5 exahash currently running, and this is for phase one. So I want to mention that. So that may have helped them get a little bit of price appreciation this week. Past them is going to be Hut 8. Hut 8 actually had an increase on their Coinbase line of credit. They now can take up to 130 million. Now, this did have an expiration sometime in 2026, this specific credit line increase, but I do think that's great news for them because now they're able to have a little bit of extra liquidity without having to sell all of their Bitcoin. Moving past them, next is going to be Canaan. And I do think that this was a pretty smart move as they've been really a Bitcoin mining manufacturing company and a Bitcoin miner. And they've been discussing trying to get into the AI side of the business. Now, with all of that, it's capital intensive to be able to manufacture these miners. It's capital intensive to be able to purchase, install, and provide infrastructure for these miners. To do all of that and also add on an AI HPC arm of their business, that does seem like quite a bit, and it could put a toll on the business. So they have decided to discontinue their AI portion of their business and solely focus on crypto mining. So we'll see how that plays out for Canaan. Will that help them to synergize their business and stay true to the Bitcoin mining manufacturing as well as mining the Bitcoin themselves? So looking forward to seeing some more monthly updates from them. Ask them is going to be BTBT. Now, they had a slew of updates, so I'm just going to give you the cliff notes. I will be putting all of these press release links in the description, so take a good look at those. And if you think I've missed any of the most important highlights, make sure you put a comment down there so I can check that out. But they did first announce a 60 million line of credit with Royal Bank of Canada. So this is pretty good because this is going to be one of those top tier financing agreement. So not an ATM, not a senior convertible note, not necessarily a Coinbase line of credit either, but actually being able to borrow cash against just credit using this Royal Bank of Canada. So that's good news here for BTBT. Now, the next press release was an ATM that they did start in order to buy some Ethereum. So I'm wondering if we're going to start to see some downward price action. We already saw quite a bit this past week. They're down 13.7% on the week. So at some point, what is the market going to think? We already know that they really do like Bitcoin treasury companies. Will they also be able to give premiums to Ethereum treasury companies? We'll have to take a look at that. Now, moving on, another one of their press releases was they announced an IPO with White Fiber. So one of their subsidiary companies will be actually having an IPO. So it'll be interesting to see how the dynamics end up coming out between BTBT and White Fiber. And then one last press release that they put out that I want to mention to you is going to be that they do plan to switch to all Ethereum treasury. So they will be phasing out their Bitcoin treasury HODL in order to purchase more Ethereum. So it's quite a gamble, in my opinion, to be fully loading or fully porting into this one digital currency, having a little bit of diversification. I don't necessarily think it's a terrible thing, but we'll have to see how it plays out for the company. This could actually help them out because they're now going to have an opportunity to be one of the highest Ethereum treasury companies. Whereas if they were to stick with Bitcoin, they may not necessarily have the capital expenditures to be able to get a substantial amount in their treasury and then to be able to continue to get more convertible note offerings or ATM offerings to be able to purchase additional Bitcoin. So we'll have to see. Maybe this Ethereum thing will work out for them. I hope it does just for the current shareholders and for the management team there. But moving past that, the next company I want to talk about is going to be Hive. Now, they had a couple of updates as well. The first update was this Buzz HPC NVIDIA Hopper GPU cluster. So they are hosting for Buzz HPC some of these NVIDIA GPU cluster units. So this is a great revenue stream for Hive. Looking forward to see what the monthly numbers look like on their next earnings statement. And then one other press release was $115.3 million was their annual revenue. And they also announced a threefold or a 3x on their HPC AI revenue stream for this last year. So they are moving financially in the right direction. We'll have to see if they can get to the point where they're able to pay for all their OPEX as well as all the cost to mine the Bitcoin. So going to be interesting to see how they actually come out on top for that. And then of course they also have the HPC AI revenue, but again, they've got the power draw for that as well. So looking forward to seeing them as they do continue to increase their hash rate and continue to find additional HPC AI partners. And the last company I want to mention is going to be Cango. They actually announced the closing of a share amount, a share settlement of $146 million worth of shares in order for them to be able to acquire 18 exahash of additional Bitcoin miners. So they're going all in on Bitcoin mining. Of course, this does hurt some shareholders because this is going to be an increase on the overall share count. However, over the course of the week, it looks like they were able to remain pretty flat on their pricing. So good news so far for Cango. Looking forward to seeing what type of operational hashing they're able to get online in the weeks and months to come. Now, let's take a look at the weekly and monthly comparison for the sector and then look at that price of Bitcoin. Moving on down, again, June 20th, looking first at the shares short, you can see an increase on number of shares being shorted of 2.5 million, and then you can see a percent decrease of 0.61%. So the overall short percent actually went down on the overall sector. And if you look at the price, which we're going to get to now, maybe that also explains a little bit of why the short percent did drop for the overall sector. So you can see here that the free float value for the company increased by $3.7 billion on just the week, and that is an increase on free float value of 16.63%. Now, taking a look at the monthly, we actually had a decrease on shares short from a quantity standpoint of 11,497,000, and the short percent was actually decreased as well at negative 1.02%. And if you look at the free float value comparing the month, there's been an increase on value for this entire sector at $5.338 billion, or a free float value increase of 25.85%. So again, the Bitcoin mining sector got a lot of love this week, and they are looking very healthy. Now let's compare that against the price of Bitcoin. We can see that the price of Bitcoin as of this past Friday was at $107,279 per coin, and on June 20th, it was $103,309. So an increase of 3.7% on the week. So we have the Bitcoin mining sector at an increase of 16.63%, whereas Bitcoin was at 3.7. So we do see a very high volatile sector compared to the price of Bitcoin. Now, when Bitcoin drops, this sector drops significantly more. So you do have to strap in and be prepared for the highs and lows. It is quite the roller coaster of a ride if you are a Bitcoin miner investor. But moving on into the month, you can see again, Bitcoin on May 30th was $103,998, so a 3.1 increase on the monthly for Bitcoin. Now comparing that against the sector, again, sector was at 25.85%. So again, this sector is really starting to get some love compared to the price of Bitcoin. So we'll see if this continues in the week to come. But now let's take a look at the top 5 most shorted Bitcoin mining companies. All right, and taking a look at number 5 on our list of most shorted Bitcoin mining companies is CleanSpark. That is ticker symbol CLSK. They had a short interest with respect to free float of 24.67%. This would be for that Thursday trading period when compared to 1 week ago, it was 26.2. So a decrease on short interest with respect to free float for CleanSpark. Moving over to days to cover, currently at 2.57 days, and utilization is at a high 81.99%. Now again, utilization is going to be the number of shares being shorted divided by the overall number of shares on loan. The short score for CleanSpark is at 74.78. And if you look down at the bottom left, you're going to see the overall price graph for each of these 5 companies. Not going to go into a lot of detail, but as I did mention on the weekly, they all saw pretty good high weekly increases. And I think CleanSpark was the third most increase on my list of 15. But moving over on the right, this is going to be the live short interest data for Ortex estimated. And for CleanSpark, it came in at 24.4%. So another decrease on short interest with respect to free float when comparing Friday to Thursday trading periods. All right, and taking a look at the Interactive Brokers short availability, last reported shares available was 1.4 million with a cost to borrow of 0.56%. And coming in at number 4 on our list is going to be Riot Platforms, that is ticker symbol RIOT. They had a short interest with respect to free float of 25.02%. When comparing that to 1 week ago, it was 24.07. So an increase on short interest with respect to free float for Riot. Moving over into days to cover, currently at 2.51 days, and utilization sitting pretty low at just 39.56%. Short score for Riot is at 65.16. Now moving down into that Friday, Ortex live estimate data here for that short percent ranking, they are at 25.11%. So an increase again on short interest with respect to free float for Riot. And taking a look at the Interactive Broker short availability, last reported shares available was 600,000 with a cost to borrow of 0.47%. And coming in at number 3 on our list is BitDeer, that is ticker symbol BTDR. They had a short interest with respect to free float of 25.94. When comparing that to 1 week ago, it was 27.35. So a decrease on short interest with respect to free float for BitDeer. Moving over into days to cover, currently at 4.58 days, and utilization sitting at 100%. Short score is at 78.83. Moving down to the bottom right, you're going to take a look at that live short interest Ortex data. This is the estimated short interest for that Friday trading period close, and it came in at 25.94%. So it did remain flat when comparing Thursday and Friday's trading periods. And taking a look at the Interactive Broker short availability, last reported shares available was 900,000 with a cost to borrow at 3.05%. So that's a pretty high percent in terms of cost to borrow. So we'll have to keep an eye on that. With the utilization being at 100, will this percent continue to increase and put pressure on these shorts to start closing out their position? That way they don't have additional profits being eroded into. Keep an eye this next week if you are a BitDeer shareholder and let me know your thoughts on that. And then coming in at number 2 on our list is Mara Holdings, that is ticker symbol MARA. They had a short interest with respect to free float of 28.46%. When comparing that to 1 week ago, it was 24.78. So a pretty substantial increase on that short interest with respect to free float for Mara. Moving over into short interest days to cover, it's at 2.28 days, and utilization is at an 82.29%. Short score for Mara is at a 72.43. Now, their live short interest, this is at Ortex estimated data for Friday, it is currently sitting at 28.47%. So another increase on short interest with respect to free float when comparing the Friday and Thursday trading periods. So again, why is Mar Holdings starting to have an increased short position? I'm interested, love to hear your thoughts on that. I don't really see that many press releases. We just saw that one partnership being announced. Of course, I haven't seen them doing a lot in terms of improving on their mining efficiency as of late, but we'll have to see if they do put out any information in this next press release when they talk about their June mining numbers. Maybe they will be able to help combat some of the short interest pressure. We'll have to wait and see. But again, love to hear your thoughts on that. And before I move on to number 1, let's take a look at Mara's Interactive Broker short availability. Their last reported share available was 950,000 with a cost to borrow of just 0.48%. And coming in at number 1, again, another week in a row, is going to be TeraWulf. That is ticker symbol WULF. They had a short interest with respect to free float of 29.55%. Now, when you look at 1 week ago, it was 32.49%. So it has been decreasing. We'll have to see if they're able to keep that going this next week. And if Mara's short interest continues to increase, they could take that number 1 short interest spot next week. So keep an eye out for that. But moving over into days to cover, currently at 2.11 days, utilization is at a 74.97%. Short score for TeraWulf is at a 68.32. Now, take a look at that price action. I know I said I wouldn't go into detail on too many, but I do think it's interesting that their Thursday was such a giant jump on price action, as we did see the price of Bitcoin kind of rebounding a bit, but then you saw that Friday pullback. But either way, TeraWulf still looking good on the weekly in terms of that share price. Now, taking a look at the live short interest data, this is for that Friday trading period. It's estimated at a 29.45%. That is a decrease on short interest with respect to free float for TeraWulf. And taking a look at the Interactive Broker short availability, last reported shares available was 7.5 million, with the cost to borrow at 0.49%. So not a lot of shares being taken up for additional shorting here for TeraWulf. So hopefully that continues for them and they're able to shake off that number one spot in terms of short interest with these miners. All right, and that about wraps up for me, folks. Hope you enjoyed this in-depth look on the weekly with these Bitcoin mining companies. We also looked at some of the press releases that came out, tried to give you a little bit of detail behind some of these short interests as well as the price changes. Hopefully you found the information helpful. If you did, consider giving the video a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and again, drop a comment. Let me know which one of these stocks are your favorite. What do you think we're going to see this next trading week? Love to get your thoughts and opinion on that. And with all that said, hope you all have a great rest of your day. Keep calm, cash on, and I'll see you on the next one.